Welcome to the Beyond the Reiki Gateway podcast with Reiki Masters Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy. This episode is sponsored in part by Mainstream Reiki, bringing Reiki further into the mainstream through education and practice. Find out more about Mainstream Reiki through a link in the show notes or on our website, beyondthereikigateway.com. And now it is time to come together and explore what lies beyond the Reiki Gateway. We are delighted to have our special guest here with us today. I'm Andrea Kennedy here with Kathleen Johnson, and William Stillman has joined us. William is a colorful and fascinating individual. We want to do a short introduction so you understand a little bit about what he has in store for us today. He's an internationally known award-winning author of several books on a variety of topics, including autism and spiritual subjects, including spiritual communication, developing your intuition, and how to communicate with animals. Since 2004, Bill has worked professionally as a psychic and spiritual counselor. His accuracy ranks between 90 and 98%. He specializes in identifying clients' gifts and talents, as well as aiding souls in transitioning to the spiritual realm. Bill has also relieved others of the physical symptoms of pain and discomfort with prayer and laying on of hands. He's been consulted on missing person and even unsolved homicide cases. You can find out more about William, his books, and all that he offers at his website, williamstillman.com. He's also on YouTube at his channel titled William Stillman, and you can also find him on Facebook under William Stillman Psychic Medium. And we just want to say welcome to you, William. We have so much we could talk to you about today, and we just are so thrilled to have you.
Indeed, we are.
Well, good morning, gals. Thank you so much for having me. I am looking forward to having a really great chat with you both.
So are we.
Yes, and let's dive right in to the spiritual realm, if that's okay. We want to just start with, how did you come to be a professional psychic and spiritual counselor? Can you fill us in a little bit about that?
Well, it took a very circuitous route to get there. I'm a very late bloomer. You know, some folks that are in the field doing what I do have always known it and felt it since childhood and have had to figure out how to reconcile some of the things that were going on for them. I had some of that myself in childhood as well. And then, unfortunately, because I was painfully and exquisitely sensitive, that didn't go over so well with my peers. And so I became the object of verbal abuse and physical harassment. And I was publicly mocked and mimicked in front of adults who really didn't do anything other than to suggest I should buck up and get over it. So, unfortunately, what happened for me was I shut down all of that sensitivity and became myself bitter and cynical. So all that I was blocked up, and I unfortunately began reflecting back what other people were projecting upon me as well. So I was, not a very nice person or very selfish and self-centered for decades. So it was really only when I was in my late 30s, early 40s that I really put my foot down and decided, I want to put effort into becoming an improved version of my old self. And I reclaimed the sensitivity that I had possessed as a very young child. And that's when everything came flooding back. And I made up for decades in about 3 months or less. I was on the fast track for sure. I also connected to a primary spirit guide. And I know you had wanted to talk about spirit guides today. And so we can talk more about that later on if you wish. But once I made that commitment, once I reconciled in my relationship with God, that's when I began to do the psychic work. That's going on 20 years now. It's been an amazing ride.
Yes, it has been. And I like the term you used, a circuitous journey. I could describe mine in much the same terms, as I'm sure many of our audience can do the same. It hasn't been an easy ride for many of us. I'm wondering, was there a catalytic event that made you decide to change course? after a lifetime of pushing everything down?
Well, it was not one single event in and of itself. Well, on second thought, maybe I take that back. I know that, as a child, I had always had an interest in things that were mystical and unusual. And I realize in hindsight now that I grew up in a family that was the exception to the norm, in that at the dinner table, we could talk about things like ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster. And my parents were always very interested in those things too, and they never dismissed the possibility of those things being real. So in that respect, there was an outlet there. And I still have books that I got for Christmas as a kid on those topics, believe it or not. And so, but as I was saying, it wasn't until I was in my late 30s, early 40s when I really put a lot of effort into transforming and undergoing a spiritual evolution. So one thing that is significant, Kathleen, to answer your question, was there a catalyst? I remember being in a job in state government in which I was feeling very dissatisfied, and I felt as though my responsibilities were being minimized and delegated to other people. I kind of could see the writing on the wall of where this all was going, and very unhappy and dissatisfied. And so I was at home one day, and I thought, well, what would be the most palatable way for me to receive answers to a prayer? I would think that would be in a dream at that time. And instead of having something, manifest in 3 dimension right in front of me as a standing vision, that would be a little disconcerting. So,
Yes.
so yes. So I said a prayer, and I said, I'm just looking for guidance. Please send me a sign or some communication of what it is I should be doing. And I laid down to take a nap, and nothing happened. That was my time, not God's time. And so that night, after I had forgotten all about it, I was shaken awake at about 2 a.m. with electricity running up and down the length of my body. I haven't felt that before or since, the most extraordinary sensation. And I had just awakened from having a very powerful dream with very profound and strong symbolism that gave me affirmation to the direction that I needed to be leaning, and gave notice at work the next day.
Wow.
Wow. That's amazing.
Listen, hang on. I'm not recommending other people do this, especially if you have children, especially if you have other responsibilities, you have a mortgage.
Yeah.
But I gave up.
Right.
I gave up my salary. I gave up benefits, access to a state car whenever I needed it, all kinds of perks that came with being, a government employee. And I had nothing lined up. I had nothing to go to, but taking that leap of faith, taking that prayer very literally, and then operationalizing that prayer, operationalizing it, putting it into operation. And I have been just fine ever since. As I said, it's been an amazing ride. It keeps getting bigger and better all the time. And so for me, it was the absolute right choice. And I have been self-employed going on 22 years now.
Wow.
That is amazing.
And I also have to say, I have no business acumen. I have no marketing skills. I have no financial skills of any kind. So how it's happened is something of a minor miracle.
So you quit your job, and that is remarkable in and of itself. And you didn't have anything lined up. So what did your days look like after that? How did you get going, if you don't mind sharing that?
They began filling up. It's the simple answer. I mean, I began to live the prayer. I began to live the dream that had been shown to me.
Oh.
And my schedule started slowly but surely filling up. I have never been without money. It's crazy.
Mm,
And you better believe I thank God for that every day.
I'm sure.
right. And so you started doing readings for people? Is that how you started?
No, what started out was I began working as an independent consultant for programs and organizations and families of children with autism.
Oh,
Okay.
Because I've worked in the field of supporting folks with developmental differences, Down syndrome, autism, intellectual disabilities for, 37, 38 years now, something like that.
Wow.
And so that was my wheelhouse. But there was very much a spiritual component to that. So what happened there was that led to writing the books that are parenting books for people on the autism spectrum or developmental disabilities. So I've done about 10 or 11 of those books, but then 3 of those books were connecting autism to spiritual giftedness. And so then that begat itself and led to exploring my own psychic abilities and gifts.
Interesting.
So a very logical progression.
Yeah.
I love to hear your background and how it has just evolved. It is fascinating. I think it could really be so helpful for so many parents who have that interest. And then also about the spiritual realm, of course, which we're going to delve into.
And what's really fascinating to me, William, is I wish I had known you about 25 years ago when I was raising my son who has autism. I was talking with Andrea about this earlier, and I said that I have 4 sons, and of those 4, I feel he is the most spiritual, but he hasn't come to that realization yet. It's one of those things where I just kind of know that eventually he will. What you said about autism and being spiritually gifted just really, really hit home with me. So thank you for saying that.
Well, you're welcome. I've been an advocate on behalf of folks with different ways of being in the world for a long time now. For them, that spiritual connection is so natural that they don't think twice about it.
Exactly.
And so it's not a priority for them. It's not an obligation for them. It's just something that is as natural as breathing. And so your son, Kathleen, may already know certain things about himself to be true. He may also not really recognize that there are things about him that are extraordinary because he, as I once did, may think that, this is true of everybody.
Right. It's no coincidence that I am his mother and he is my son because of what my work is about these days. It's just interesting some of the conversations we have. So I look forward to his realizations and development as time goes on. What you said was very validating.
You're welcome. And by the way, I'm one of 4 boys myself.
That's neat.
Wow. Yeah, it's an interesting household raising 4 boys, that's for sure.
You mentioned a spirit guide, I believe, William, earlier that you started becoming aware of. If you could perhaps share a little bit about that, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you.
Yes. We're talking about Frank.
Frank, okay.
My primary spirit guide. I have 4 of which I am aware, and as your listeners may know, we all have at least one. We all have at least one that's assigned to us, and others can step forward from time to time depending upon their area of expertise and how that synchronizes with certain activities or events or ventures that we are undergoing in our lives. But I actually understood and learned about the concept of spirit guides from one of John Edwards' books. And coincidentally, I am connected to his agent, who also has a child on the autism spectrum. And so she found me and then recommended me to be interviewed by Shar Margolis. So that's how all that came about.
Interesting.
With the Shar Margolis interview that's on YouTube. Yes. And so small world.
It is.
But I was reading, I believe the book is called One Last Time. Forgive me, John, if I didn't get it right, but I believe that's the title. And in it, he talks about his connection to spirit guides and a primary guide, and in particular, how that happened. And so I christened my guide with the first name that popped into my head, which was Frank. And as I tell people, Frank's name probably isn't Frank, and Frank couldn't care less. It's
Right.
It's the acknowledgement, Frank is just fine by him. So it's the acknowledgement of the presence that they really care about, and the awareness and the consciousness of the connection in the relationship. That's what they care about. They don't care what you call them. And so I always tell people, well, if you're going to communicate with a spirit guide or you're going to establish that relationship, it is always extremely imperative, in my opinion, to do that in the context of a prayer, so that you are blessed, so that you are protected, and so that you are ensured that whatever comes forward is going to be most likely authentic for your greater good. And so I christened him Frank, and I knew from reading John Edwards' book to wait about a week to 10 days or so for some sort of symptom of his presence, some sort of sign or signal. And sure enough, within a week, there were 3 days in a row where there was a validation around the name Frank. Now, could that be that I was just more aware of the name Frank? Yes. So not everything is something, right, gals?
Right.
And sometimes people go way overboard with all this stuff. But I will tell you that the last day that there was a Frank connection was, without a doubt, the most powerful. And so I'll be happy to share that
Yes,
with your
please.
listeners if you would like.
Absolutely. Please do.
I've written about it in my books also. It was a Friday the 13th. I was home and there was a knock on my front door. I answered the door. It was this young guy who had been driving the garbage truck that day. And I, at that time, lived in a house that was on the edge of a little cul-de-sac. So he had pulled into the cul-de-sac. And then when he was backing out, he clipped my mailbox post and split the post, the wood post. And he was coming to the door to tell me this. And from where I stood, it looked okay. But he said, no, you better come down to the street and look at it. So I did. And sure enough, it was split. And I said, well, will the sanitation company pay for a replacement? And he said that they would. And he hopped in the cab of the truck and he jotted down the information. And I thought he was giving me, their contact information. Now, this happened about 23 years ago or so. When he handed me the piece of paper, it was his name and address and phone number. And I said, well, wait a minute. I thought you said they would take care of it. And he said, well, and then it dawned on me. I said, oh, if I report this to them, does that put you in any kind of jeopardy? And he said, well, it could affect my driving record with the company. And if it's all the same to you, I would just as soon go to the hardware store and buy you a new post and come back and replace it myself. And I said, well, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. And he drove off. Within the hour, I had decided, this might be an opportunity here. And I thought, I'm going to honor this boy's honesty because I didn't hear anything. He could have driven off. I never would have known what happened. But he made a point of coming to the door and telling me and then offering to make it right personally.
Right.
So I went to call him to say, I will allow you to do this. His name was Frank, of course, but his last name was Ward, W-A-R-D. And, I couldn't get that out of my head for the next 24 hours or so. That I kept coming back to that. What is that about? Why does that keep coming up in my head? And I finally made the connection. That's a word in the English language. And I looked up the definition of the word ward in my dictionary, and the definition pertains to guardianship and the act of keeping guard.
Oh, my. Oh,
when
my.
you're someone's ward. Yes.
That's
and
right.
so this boy's name translated to Frank the Guardian.
Oh, my goodness.
And you know what? So there could have been no clearer affirmation of the presence of my guide. Now, I want to tell everybody listening, Frank Ward is not my spirit guide, okay? But it's what it's what he symbolized.
Right.
It's what he symbolized. That was the intended communication. And I'll tell you, gals, he did make good on his promise. He came back and he replaced the post. And while he was working, I was chatting with him. And he said, well, I wasn't even supposed to have been here that day that this all happened. He said, my regular route is way, way across the river from where we are. I was filling in for someone that had called off sick, and it was my first time driving in the area.
So
That's
interesting.
incredible. And it goes in the category of you just can't make this stuff up.
I was just going to say that, Andrea.
Yes.
It's a beautiful story. And then ever since then, Frank has been Frank with me, and he is my lead guide. And you know what's also interesting? Now, again, this is going back over 2 decades ago. Um, I was not as comfortable and confident with all of this stuff as I am now. And so the couple of times that I quote unquote saw Frank, he always showed himself to me as a teenage boy who came up to about the middle of my chest, a big mop of black curls on his head, beautiful face. But I realize now why he showed himself to me that way, as opposed to a 6'4", bare-chested Aztec warrior with
Right.
makeup on his face and holding a spear, because it wasn't intimidating.
Ah.
Mm.
And I was in a parental role, actually, with the way that he presented himself. So very smart on his part.
Hmm.
Whenever he would embrace me, and again, I haven't seen him in that way in a long, long time, but there was maybe 2 or 3 times. But he would embrace me, and again, his head would come up to about my chest, and looked like a very young boy. Wore something like a Greek toga.
That's
That's
fascinating.
so interesting.
It is. It is.
You touched on something that I have long, known to be true, is that our guides present to us in the way that is just right for us. And your guide presented as not intimidating. When I see my guides, they're pretty resplendent, I guess would be the word, because I guess they think that that is what I expect. And honestly, that kind of is the truth. So they show us themselves in the way that they know they will be most accepted, I think. And I've had many people over the years describe their guides to me, and every single one is so unique. So I'm really glad you touched on that.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I really hadn't considered that it was sort of a universal approach until you just said that, Kathleen. So I always just thought it was Frank being very wise in and very cautious in the approach that he was taking. But I didn't. It didn't occur to me that other people have experienced that as well. So thanks for sharing that.
Oh, sure. That has been my experience working with clients, and we do meditations to connect with guides, and the descriptions are all so different and unique to the individual. And I think it's
Right.
fascinating.
Yeah, and some of them are animals.
Right,
That is true.
right.
Well, and I liked the point that you made, William, too, about the name and how it doesn't matter because I think sometimes people can get really hung up on that. So I really appreciate you bringing that up and that Frank resonated with you. It works for you, but it is the energy.
Right.
Well, Frank is also the name of Frank Baum, who wrote the Oz stories.
Oh,
Right.
And
that's
that's
right.
been part of my life since I was a child. I'll never forget doing a session with a young gal, and she said, "Well, can you tell me the name of my spirit guide?" I always tell people it's whatever you want it to be,
Mhm.
but I said Bernadette, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I've loved that name since I was a little girl," which is kind of interesting because oftentimes, if we think about it, those of us who have had an imaginary friend, an imaginary playmate that we recall from childhood, or maybe a parent will tell us, you used to talk to so and so when you were a kid.
Mm,
Oftentimes, that's the primary guide, kind of
Ah,
establishing the relationship now that you are here in human form.
I see.
interesting. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Sometimes I'll have clients that I'll say, do you remember having a tea party with an imaginary friend when you were a little girl, things of that nature, or making mud pies with someone, you know, and they'll say, yes, Andrea, you remember doing
Yeah, oh,
this? Yes.
yes.
Me
You're
too.
raising your hands. Yes. And so that may, in fact, have been a spirit guide.
Mm. And can you describe what you know to be true in your experience about spirit guides? For example,
Yes.
we get one, we get many, whatever it is through your experience that you think for sure.
Yeah. And I appreciate you asking that question because I think there's a lot of confusion about that.
Hmm.
In my opinion and in my experience, a spirit guide is the soul energy of a long lost friend we forgot we had. So it's a
Oh.
relationship that was established in the heavenly realm. There was a pact or an agreement that was made
Hmm.
prior to incarnating here in human form. And so a deceased grandparent, for example, a deceased parent is not a spirit guide because we've known them in this lifetime.
Oh.
So I call those energies that come around us from time to time where we can catch a fleeting whiff of their tobacco smoke or their cologne or floral scent. I call those guardians. So I make the distinction between a guide and a guardian. So I'm not dismissing the possibility of people that we have known and who have passed on coming around us, but not, well, I should qualify that. In almost 20 years of working as a psychic medium, I've had, I think, 3 times when someone's deceased father came through and offered to serve as a guide for that client. Very rare in
Mm.
my experience. So when I think of a spirit guide, I think of Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio, kind of like this little glorified conscience that struggles to keep us on the straight and narrow path, to distract our attention to the people, places, and things that will serve our greater good. Also, to serve as a muse to impress us with creative inspiration.
Yes.
Ah,
Yes.
Yeah. So I believe that we all have a primary or a lead guide. And then there are, as I said earlier, there are also others that may come and recede depending upon the course our life is taking.
And that primary or lead guide, are they with us from birth until death in the lifetime?
Yes,
Okay.
I believe that to be true. Yes.
Oh.
hmm
And then of course we will be reunited with that person or that energy. I don't know.
hmm
I believe that the lead guide has probably been human and has known enough about the range of human experiences to be in a position to serve in the function of that guide,
hmm
that mentor.
Yes.
That
hmm
would make sense for
It
sure.
would make
It
sense.
makes a
Yeah.
Yes.
I
lot of sense.
remember,
Yes.
during that 3 month period of time that I was saying I was on the fast track, I was being given nightly dreams in which I was being shown many varied aspects of the human condition. I was being given spiritual problems to solve in the context of the dream, all kinds of amazing lessons that I was being shown. But one of those dreams, I remember being in a room without walls. I don't know how else to describe it, in a private space. And my guide was sitting above me, and I was being encouraged to just move with the beat of the music that I was hearing and use that as a catalyst to create. And once I got over my self consciousness and was actually moving with the music and throwing my hands and body around, I was creating all of this crazy fluorescent psychedelic stuff that was coming out of me. And my guide was encouraging me and kind of cheering me on.
Yeah. That's so cool.
It was fascinating. That was, again, well over 20 years ago. And I still carry with me the sensation of that amazing feeling that I was capable of creating whatever I could imagine, whatever I was feeling, whatever emotion. Just extraordinary experience.
Yes.
I appreciate hearing about that dream. Dreams can be so powerful, real, educational, and so much more than just a passing dream.
Oh, yeah. William, if you can explain a little bit about the difference as you see it between a guide and a guardian. You touched on that a moment ago.
Well, we've talked at length about the guide and the function of the guide. So the
Right.
guardians, as I said, in my opinion and in my experience, the guardians are the soul energies of loved ones that we have known. in this lifetime. So a parent or a grandparent or a sibling that's deceased, for example. Now, I believe that I believe their primary function is to demonstrate their great love and care and concern for us by coming around at times when we need a reminder that we are loved and adored. On anniversaries or birthdays, they will sometimes make their presence known. And again, this is very fleeting. This is not something that occurs for hours on end. It's very quick, and oftentimes the most facile manner for them to do that is in the form of an aroma that we would associate in memory with that person, and perhaps that even synchronizes and aligns with a memory that we are calling up with that person.
Right.
And the most stunning demonstrations of that is when we are driving in the car with the windows closed. And of course, that smoke smell or that perfume or that cooking smell or the roses or whatever it may be is not coming from anywhere else but inside the car. So,
Right.
but one of the challenges with all of that, however, is I have seen people become so in the depths of their extraordinary grief, they become so desperate and urgent that when they do get a sign, they want more. It's never enough. And so that's not healthy either. And it actually creates a blockage for those guardians and other loved ones that have passed on to make their presence known.
Oh, like a tunnel vision kind of thing, right? They just are so fixated on that.
It becomes a preoccupation bordering on obsession.
Oh,
In fact, I was sitting with a mom, and I had a young fella come through, and I will, as a medium, I will channel people and use the phrasing and the body language, the facial expressions and the language that they have used. And that's called evidential mediumship. That's part of how you know you're getting who you're getting.
Right.
And first words out of this kid's mouth were, "Mom, knock it the F off." What he meant was, she spent absorbing amounts of time demanding a sign from him. Show me this, tell me something. This was every day, day in, day out. And he says, "Stop pulling on me." He says, I won't use his language, "I got stuff to do, stop pulling on me." And he was right. She had stopped living for being so completely absorbed in her own grief that this was how she spent all her time. And he was saying, "Remember me fondly. The bond that we have can never be severed, but you can't be neglecting my siblings. You can't be neglecting Dad. You have to keep moving forward."
what a gift.
Yes, indeed. And did she listen to her son, to your knowledge?
That I don't know. He certainly was very blunt and direct in kind of telling her the way it was. I'm hopeful that she was able to assimilate all of that and to find some reconciliation or some balance.
Right. I hope so for her sake too. I truly do.
Absolutely.
Trust me, it was challenging for me to. I don't like to censor anybody, so it was challenging for me to kind of blurt that out. But it felt like that's what needed to be said.
Right.
Right. Yeah. There was a reason why he was so blunt.
And he said, you. Again, I won't use his language unless we're allowed to in this kind of format.
You do whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay.
Exactly.
He said through me, he said, "Mom, you would shit a brick if you saw me standing at the edge of your bed."
Oh my
He
goodness.
said, so it was basically like, be careful of what you ask for here too.
True.
With her constantly pulling on him, he said, basically in my terms, that would be so extremely unnerving to her to get her wish fulfilled, that
Right.
it would it would cause more harm than good.
That is something. You mentioned mediumship, William, and you do those sort of sessions. I know you do a lot in the spiritual realm for people. Can you discuss a little bit about the different offerings that you have for people?
It took me a long time to kind of wrap my head around using that word medium because, as you ladies know, there's a difference between being psychic and being a psychic medium. And maybe your listeners are not completely clear about all of that. So, a psychic is someone that can offer you intuitive guidance about any aspect of your life. So, that would be relationship, marriage, children, employment, home, pets, travel, that kind of thing. A psychic medium can do all of that, but also has the ability to tap into the soul energy of deceased loved ones. So
Mm-hmm.
when you bill yourself as a psychic medium, you are automatically setting a very high bar in terms of the standard of expectation
Right.
of what people, when they sit down with you or you're communicating long distance on the phone or Zoom or whatever, people have very high expectations if you are a
Sure.
psychic medium. So it took me a little while to kind of warm up to that, but I am perfectly comfortable with that now. I do private sessions one-on-one with people. And here's an interesting thing too that people may not know about me. I only allow people to have one session a year with me.
Right. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
I do too.
Yeah, I have had people beg and plead and cry and offer me extra money, and I have always been consistent in declining that because I don't think it's healthy.
Mm.
I think we need to have faith in our faith. I don't want to create or foster any kind of dependency.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been very firm about that, much to the dismay of people. Also, as a psychic, I've learned that I could communicate with animals, usually dogs. So I do that. I've also, as you mentioned in your introduction, Andrea, have done some missing persons and unsolved homicide cases. And I also have a standard of ethics when it comes to that because I will not do anything for the friend of a friend. I will not do anything like that
Mm-hmm.
because someone thinks
Mm-hmm.
it would be a good idea if I get involved. In order for me to do that, I must always be contacted directly by the family
Mm-hmm.
or by law enforcement
Mm-hmm.
before I get
Exactly.
involved.
Yep.
Like they have to want it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that I'm able to do is, as you mentioned, relieve people of physical pain and discomfort with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
I have had people come to me with walkers and crutches and walk out. I have had a couple of occasions where people were on their way to the emergency room and ended up not going as a result of what I was able to do for them with God working through me. I don't take credit for any of this. And it's a very, very quick process that takes about 5 minutes.
Wow. Oh, I think I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Reiki.
Mhm.
I know nothing about Reiki. I've never been trained in any. I am completely self taught in all that I do,
Mm.
all that I do. So I'd never had anyone respond to my outreaches early on that said I can help you navigate what's going on for you. So I'm completely self-taught in all that I do.
Mm-hmm.
But the healing, I take the person's hands in mine, I say the Lord's Prayer with them, so we're covered and protected. I'm usually able to, just by looking at them, route out the area of their body where they're having issues. I always visualize the pain as a tangible substance. I see it as a black tar or a black gunk of some sort, like a
Mm-hmm.
jelly. I will go in with my hands. I will work it up into my hands out of the body. It's like a cross between pulling taffy and squeezing a pimple. And I get it into my hands. Once I have it in my hands, I don't want it either. So I always visualize this beautiful crystal clear running stream right next to us. I rinse my hands off in the water. I send it downstream. The water absorbs it and dissolves it. And I do that a minimum of 3 times, sometimes more if the pain has been chronic and I feel like it's being stubborn. And then once I clear it out, then obviously there's sort of an empty pocket there that the pain had occupied for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I fill that with a beautiful green, glowing, healing light that spills down over my shoulders, down my arms, and at my fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
And when I feel satisfied that it's filled, I'll kind of smooth it over and top it off. And then I'll check in with the person and see how they are feeling. Maybe have them give me a lap around the room or show me their range of motion
Right.
if they're able to do that. What I have that person doing is, well, the whole time I'm working, I always say to them, please just visualize the last time you were at the seashore and synchronize your breathing with the rhythm of the waves.
Oh,
And then while you're doing that, just let me do my thing and I'll check in with you when I'm done.
that's beautiful.
Oftentimes they will report feeling a slight burning sensation or a tingling sensation.
Mm-hmm.
That's not uncommon. So I don't know what to call it, but I know what to do.
That's what matters.
For sure. Oh my goodness. Yeah, thank you for describing that. It's really beautiful. I have a question too about angels. We've talked about spiritual guides, guardians. Do angels come into the sessions, and what's your understanding about angels?
I have very limited experience with angels. For whatever reason, I don't know why. I could probably count on one hand, maybe part of a second hand, the number of times I've sensed them. When I'm detecting spiritual energies, over a client's right shoulder is mother's side, over the client's left shoulder is father's side. So that's how I'm able to distinguish what side we're talking about usually. I always see spirit guides directly standing dead center in back of a client. So that's how I know it's a spirit guide. That's also been the position in which, on the very few times that I've seen angels, where I've seen angels. I don't know why that is that I've seen them so rarely, but I don't see them appearing in a traditional way with, the flowing white robe and wings and long blonde hair. That's not what I see. What I see, and how I know it's an angel, is I see this massive column of luminous golden light. Almost looks like a lava lamp where there's, it's kind of swirling and liquidy inside. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes up as far as the eye can see. That's what I see. So that's how I know it's an angel.
Interesting.
And other than that, that's about the extent of my experience with them.
Yeah.
I know that there are some people that's all they do is angels and working with angels, but I have very limited experience.
Well, I think everybody is just tuned into what they're tuned into for whatever reason.
Exactly. We each have our own gifts and our own abilities.
I will tell you that the times that I have seen them, it was exactly what the client needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Yes. Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
If they needed reassurance that indeed there is an angel that is guarding them or protecting their home, that's what they needed to hear in that moment. So I'm grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful.
So one thing we haven't yet touched on, Andrea, is the fact that you and I have both had personal readings with William, as have our dogs.
Yes.
Our audience has heard us mention Goldie and Frida in previous episodes. So our dogs have also had readings with William. And I have to say, both of the ones for myself, including my dog, were wonderful. They were very supportive and loving. And I've already received validation and confirmation of so many things. I would like to share some of that, but first of all, Andrea, how were yours, and what can you say about the readings you had, and of course the reading you had for Frida?
Oh, I could say a lot actually, but yeah, we
Yep.
have two very lucky dogs, is all I can say. My first meeting with William was for myself, and I've had readings throughout the years from different people. And I have to say, this was really phenomenal for me. It was unexpected as far as the guardians that came. And I really was scratching my head during the session, thinking, why those people? Why would they come? But William provided answers for me. His answers helped provide context. It allowed me to make connections and go, oh, I guess that makes sense then, because I'm going through this in my life. So there was relevance there. You're very good at connecting the dots for the people in the session. Sometimes we just scratch our heads, I think, at least I do, in a reading because it's so exciting and there are so many things going through my head. Sometimes I can't come up with the connection right away and it comes in later. And I remember in the reading I had with you, William, I asked that age old question, who's my main guide? And I wasn't really expecting a name or, I didn't know what to expect. You provided a name for me and I wasn't familiar with the name. I hadn't really heard it or made any connections, but you said reference the Bible, find out who this person was in the Bible. And as it turns out, the name was Jethro, and it referenced the father in law of Moses, which had special meaning to me because I've had a Moses connection, a Moses archetype that's been active in my lifetime. And so knowing that and making that connection really made all the difference for me in validating not just that, the identity of this main guide, but the reading as a whole, the entire reading and things that came through. And as far as Frida goes, we were in an event, Kathleen, and there were other people there.
Right.
We were online. Some had cats, some had dogs. And it was fascinating to hear
It was.
William's take on and readings about all the different animals. And what sticks out to me is that he suggested that Frida had a hard time being a dog at first and wasn't a dog before, which I found very curious. So when it was my opportunity to ask a question, I asked him, if she hasn't been a dog, what was she? And he told me, if you recall, a snake. And I thought, what? A snake? But I immediately remembered when she was a puppy, she wasn't a normal puppy. She didn't react like a normal puppy would. All the dog people out there know this. When you talk in a high voice and you're all excited, what does the dog normally do? They get excited, they
They
wag
get
their
excited.
tail, they're full of energy. Frida just looked at me like I was insane or something. She didn't respond at all when I would do that. I thought she's very strange. Then I recalled this moment. Dinner was going to go on the grill. And that particular night, we had boneless chicken breasts there on the counter. And that dog, she was very young. She went up on the counter and she slurped 2 full chicken breasts whole, sort of like a snake, right? A snake eats their food just
Whoa.
whole like that. She slurped down 2 of those chicken breasts. And before she could get the third, I'm saying, Frida. And she just completely ignored me. Like most dogs, when you say, hey, it gets their attention, didn't care at all. It was one of those moments where I thought, who are you? You don't respond the way a normal dog does. So it was in the moment, it sounded crazy. I mean, I don't mean to say that, but it was like my dog was a snake. So a lot of people might think that is kind of out there, but I have to tell you, she goes and lays in the sun and bakes, and she's black. And you could fry an egg on her. But the thing is, she reminds me of what snakes do. They go and they sun themselves. I don't know. It just rings very true when you look back at her life. And he was also right in that she has really come into her own. She's learned how to be a dog, and she's a great dog now. It took her some time, I think, to adjust, but she's really great.
That's all very, very interesting to me.
That was.
Thank you for the follow-up.
You're so welcome. It was fun. Very fun, very enlightening. You know what? It helps us think outside the box. What we just assume every day going through life. It's a new perspective and it helps me contemplate these other reasons the way things are. It was great, but both of them, mine and for Frida. And so, Kathleen, why don't you tell us a bit about your experience?
Well, it was similar to yours, Andrea, in that I had a guide who I got a name, which was really interesting. I've always felt that I've had multiple guides around me that have shifted over the years based on my growth and my evolution and my progress. But William named one who's directly behind me, and he gave her the name of Wendy. And apparently, she's the guide who is helping me with my writing. That resonated so strongly with me because writing, as you know, is something I love. It's one of my passions. I'd
Hmm.
like to do more of it. And William said that Wendy is available to assist me in all my writing endeavors. And all I need to do is, you know, ask for her assistance in a reverential, respectful way and center myself, and that information will come in more easily. And then the other thing that was interesting that I didn't get at the time, I was casting about in my mind, who is he talking about? That kind of thing. And I couldn't figure out who the individual was that was one of my guardians. And it was a woman with the middle name of Anne. I'm like, I don't know anybody like that. Later on, I'd say a day or two later, I was lying in bed. It was first thing in the morning. I was just coming into full consciousness, and I knew who it was. There was a cousin with whom I was very close as a child. We were only 3 weeks apart in age, and her middle name was Anne, but I never used her middle name. It was never anything that came up, and she died very suddenly in her sleep a few years ago. We had grown apart over the years, and I grieved her death because of that, but I knew it was her, and that was very validating. Not at the moment of the reading, but a day or two later, I just knew it, and it made me feel so good. So, thank you for that, William. Now, there was a lot more that came through in the reading. It was very loving, as I said, very supportive, and all of it was validated and confirmed. So it was a wonderful experience, and I know I can't do it again until next September, but I will be back.
Right.
All right, and then moving on to Goldie. We had been concerned about Goldie because she's almost 13, and just some changes in her that I was worried about. And I had made an appointment for the vet to see her a few days after we had this pet reading. William, you took one look at her photo and her name and her age, and you said her vision is dimming. And I didn't say anything. And you also detected some discomfort around her hindquarters and in her digestive system. I had been wondering about the back legs myself because she seemed to be struggling a little bit with, getting up and those kinds of things. You also indicated that she was aware of some mold issues in our house prior to us knowing about it at all. That was one of those moments where I was thinking, what is that about? I couldn't remember. Then I realized it was in a room toward the front of our house where we were having problems, didn't know what it was. Goldie kept sniffing over there and like wandering over there and like, what is she doing? There's nothing there. Turns out we did have a not too serious, thank goodness, mold issue in that corner of the house. So she knew way before we did there was something going on. Mine wasn't nearly as dramatic as Andrea's snake dog, but it was still really fascinating. I think Andrea's snake dog was the star of that reading. Everybody was like, what?
The thing that stuck out to me during that whole panel with all of us there is Frida was the only one that he mentioned not being a dog or a cat before.
I
It
know.
wasn't like,
Exactly.
yeah, it was
No.
very different for
Yeah.
sure.
It
Mhm.
was it was unique. It really stuck out. It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I'm fond of saying it's never dull.
Yeah,
You can't make this stuff up.
absolutely.
Okay, so fast forward, I took Goldie to the vet a few days after the reading, and I told the vet my concerns, her mobility. I didn't say anything about her eyes, and I didn't say anything about her digestion. I was wanting to see if the vet would pick up on it. Turns out that she does have some arthritis in her hips, which would explain the discomfort in her hindquarters. She is now on a supplement for that, and I'm happy to say that she's regained most of her mobility. She's jumping around and doing everything she used to do, so that's wonderful. And they also detected some gastric distress, and we were told to make some changes in her food, which we have done, which seems to have helped too. And finally, the vet was kind of wrapping up the session, and I said, do you mind checking her eyes? I have a little concern that maybe there's something going on there. And I just left it at that. So she got out her handy dandy instrument, and lo and behold, she said, yes, she has lenticular sclerosis, which is a disorder that happens pretty frequently with older dogs. And she said it would be as if a human reading a newspaper could not read the fine print, but they could see the headlines. It's that kind of vision issue. And if she was a human, she'd be wearing glasses. So I said, okay, it doesn't cause blindness. It's nothing that we need to worry about. But yes, her vision is dimming, as you said. So that was 100% validation of everything you had said about Goldie. And I was just thrilled. I was so happy you mentioned those things. So I was able to then mention them to the vet.
That's extraordinary. I consider people my area of expertise. And so the occasions when I do read dogs, it's kind of, again, taking kind of a leap of faith of, wanting to make sure that I'm being helpful and not hurtful, certainly. So I'm thrilled to hear the validations from the both of you. And I get blown away just as much as everybody else does. Trust me.
Yeah, I understand that. It was really wonderful. I do have a question about the dogs, though. Do you have the one reading a year rule for dogs as well?
Oh, I haven't thought about that.
Oh,
Well, think
I'll
about
get
it,
back to you about
William.
that.
All right. Well, Andrea, I think we may have run ourselves out of time once again. The time
oh,
has just flown with this episode. I don't know about for you, but my goodness, I could sit here and talk with William and you for the rest of the day.
I know, I know. I hope he'll consider coming back and we can talk about
Oh, me
something
too.
else because he has such a
Yes.
background. And we just want to thank you again, William, for coming on with us and sharing. We so appreciate it.
It was a great, great pleasure. And I just want to let people know a little something. It's kind of a little inside thing that
Yes.
happened. When we first began, we were having a lot of technical difficulties, particularly on Kathleen's end. And, it got a little bit ridiculous after a while. And I finally thought, you know what? I've had this happen so many times when I'm interviewed. And I said, gals, let's just take a time out here for a moment. Let me say a blessing with you.
Hmm.
And we did that. You were both gracious enough to indulge me.
Absolutely.
And we concluded the blessing, and everything has run smoothly for the past, 90 minutes without any issues. So,
Hmm.
I know.
you know,
Yes, I know.
power of
Incredible.
prayer, right? Power of prayer. And it was
I know.
beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you for doing that. It made all the difference.
It did. And I know I felt an energy shift and Kathleen mentioned it as well after
I
you
did.
said the
I
blessing.
could
So
feel that.
it was very helpful and powerful. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I would be delighted to come back whenever you wish.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks so much.
Count on it.
And you have many resources on your website that I'd like to remind the listeners about, even articles about spirit guides, if they would like to check those out. Again, williamstillman.com. And we'll also link those articles in the show notes underneath the episode, along with your Facebook page, your YouTube channel, and any other links that we might be able to share so that people can find you and have their own experience. We thank you again for joining us. And of course, we invite you to join us next time as we journey beyond the Reiki Gateway with Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy.